I'm going to talk a bit this evening about the theme of refuge, which is one of the core Buddhist teachings. And some of you know, there's a few of you here, I think, who have been participating. I've been offering a once a month ceremony that's based on it's called Ryakapusats, or the full moon ceremony, which I learned in my time as a Zen student. And it's actually a very ancient ceremony that was part of the ritual of the Sangha. And it has continued over these thousands of years as a kind of process by which communities of people who are practicing the Dharma could come together and reflect on their actions, on our actions of body, speech, and mind, and retake our vows, retake our commitment, our intention to living a life of wholeness, fullness, goodness, you know, sort of whatever our highest aim, our highest intention might be. And this month, I've been doing these the first Thursday of the month, and this first Thursday in the month was actually the full moon. It's kind of wonderful. And the tradition was that these gatherings within the community would happen on the brightest night and the darkest night of every month. So the full moon and the new moon. And this month, the topic that we worked with was the topic of refuge. So I wanted to bring that here, and tonight we'll do a combination of me talking about refuge, and then at the end of our time, we'll do a little bit of chanting together. We'll do a little bit of participation and ceremony, and don't worry about it. Johnny's going to put the words up on the screen, and you are welcome to, you can shout out the precepts wherever, it's the refuges, sorry, wherever you are, if you're in a place that allows you to do that, or you can just read along and listen as you like. So there's no pressure. But I wanted to give you a taste of that flavor of what was really a core part of the early teachings, which was the community part of the practice. And interestingly, today I listened to a talk, a podcast, I guess it was, from Wisdom Publications with Venerable Análio, who some of you may know. He's an Austrian bhikkhu, a monk, and quite an amazing scholar. He's done remarkable research on some of the core texts, early Pali texts, the Satipatthana, mindfulness of breathing. He's been a very strong advocate for the bhikkhunis, the women, and has kind of shown through his research that all of the logic about why women can't have full ordination is nonsense. He's a deep practitioner. Some of you may have also, but I've had the opportunity to sit with him on retreat, and boy, that guy just sits like for hours. Everyone in the hall is like getting up and getting down and walking and sitting, and he's just boom. He just sits there like all day. From the early morning, he gets to the hall before us, and then he sits all the way till lunch. He has his lunch, and then, he gives a little talk. But he's really this beautiful blend of scholar practitioner. Anyway, he has a new book out, which is about the oral tradition of the Buddhist teachings. And I have been doing my own research of late, trying my best to learn about and uncover some of the stories of the early Buddhist nuns. And there is very little, not nothing, but very little known about them. And I thought, oh, I would like to hear what Analio has to say about this oral tradition and really at the question of what can we trust? Like, what's the true teaching? You know, what did the Buddha really say? And as some of you may know, the teachings were handed down in an oral tradition through memorization for about 400 years before anything was written down. So here, my favorite thing that Analio said in the whole of the talk was he said, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but he said basically, there is no way that we can possibly know what the Buddha actually said. And then he said, sorry. And I found that to be so wonderful because it keeps us from being dogmatic, right? From grabbing on and going, no, this is what it says in the Pali Canon, which is, of course, when we read it, a translation from another language anyway. So we don't need to get too tight about the words. But even like he completely poo-pooed that, the Pali Canon is the earliest teachings and so on. No, not necessarily. Some of the earliest things that were written down in Chinese. That's not in the Pali Canon, but they may reflect the earliest teachings. Anyhow, um, he really was pointing to the idea that while we can't know the particulars, that there were a lot of key themes that the Buddha taught that we know for sure because they're repeated over and over. They show up in different languages, they show up over time. So whether it's the teachings of, the three characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, this teaching of non-self, or the teaching of generosity, like Fahad was talking about, or the teaching of emptiness or dependent or origination, or there are key things. And the teaching of the refuges is one of those. So it is a teaching that spans every Buddhist tradition. You find it in the Theravada, the Mahayana, the Vajrayana, this very core idea of what's sometimes referred to as going for refuge. And I have been reflecting on this quite a bit, and it seems to me that the fact that this is a key teaching is it's a kind of pointing instruction. The fact that the Buddha is pointing us toward refuge and toward where to take refuge suggests, as I often like to say, that we are, for the most part, kind of mixed up. We're looking for love in all the wrong places. If that weren't the case, then he wouldn't need to point us in this other direction. And this is, I think, points to a larger theme that I have found very helpful in my practice and also in my understanding of the broader teachings, which is that most of Buddhist teaching is, if we're not going to get too tangled up in the details and the particulars of what the words are, almost everything that's worth learning in Buddhist teaching and Buddhist practice, both, is fundamentally a pretty radical reorientation to ourselves, to each other, to the world. And this plays out over and over and over again, right? So in our meditation practice, for example, we are, instead of getting caught in the world of the mind and in our stories and our thoughts, we're being invited to, sometimes called, drop under the surface and experience, embody our direct experience rather than our thought about our experience, right? So we all know that there's a difference. If you think about a person you know, that thought is not the same as the experience, right? If you read about, a ham sandwich on a menu and then you eat it, those are different experiences, right? But we live so much in the world of the mind that the practice itself is inviting us to do this reorientation, to shift out of the rapid but very thin, actually, kind of two-dimensional world of thought into our direct sensory experience. That's one simple example. Also, we're invited to notice not just the objects of what we're aware of, our sights, sounds, thoughts, feelings, smells, tastes, touch, but we're also invited to start to pay attention to awareness itself, which isn't an object. Mm. That's a radical reorientation. It's very much like if you look around the space where you are now, the room or wherever you are calling in from, most often your sight and your mind will go to the objects in the room. So I see a plant and my screen and my bell and my water bottle and my pencil and the paper. So now look around the same space, but notice the space. You can't really have one without the other. But this is the reorientation of our practice, is that we're shifting from what we habitually go to begin to notice other dimensions of our experience. So refuge and this idea of refuge has that flavor in it. Refuge itself, I think, is at its heart, it's a reorientation because most of us are looking for refuge someplace, right? The word refuge is a place of safety. And if we're honest, I think most of us are looking for a place where we hurt less, a place where it's more peaceful, a place where other people aren't so annoying, a place where we aren't so reactive. That's sort of the language we use. And we imagine that that place is someplace else. We put a lot of stock in objects. I have, some of you may be able to tell from the camera view that I recently moved into a new home, which is paradoxically both incredibly wonderful experience and very disorienting and sort of discombobulating. um, and I have been watching how deeply ingrained the mind is. The mind is that imagines if only I can get all the boxes unpacked, if only I can create a little bit of order, if only I get blinds so that the sun isn't coming in, if only I get, and then a lot of those things I'm getting because we're, steadily chug, 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 unpacking boxes and putting things away and creating some order. And then what I notice is that I do the thing that my mind was so sure was going to make me happy, right? And then it doesn't. And it's not that it was bad. It's just that it didn't make me happy. Why? Because then there's the next thing. This is our normal human life. And this what if mind, right? This is, I think, really in many ways the engine that drives capitalism. Because all of us imagine, like, if only, and you can fill in your own blank here. I used to be when I would go on retreat when I was younger, uh, I had this weird idea that if only I had the right shoes, I had to have the kind of shoes that were like, so you could get in and out, slip on shoes. But then sometimes I was going somewhere where it's cold, so then they needed to be warm, or I had going somewhere it was going to be rainy, so I needed them to be waterproof. But that's where my mind would go in the midst of, walking into the unknown of a retreat. My mind would grab on to this thing like, oh, if only I have the right shoes. Yours might be different. If only I have the right amount of caffeine or the right food or the right person sitting next to me or right? This is what we all do. So this is what this reorientation is about. And this teaching on refuge is pointing us to the fact that we are all refugees in a way. And I don't want to say this to in any way belittle people who are actual refugees, who have lost their homes, who are fleeing unsafe situations. But in a Buddhist context, the Buddha is inviting us to take refuge, to come home in a way, because we are lost, because we're always looking out, trying to get something. And that the word refuge, the English word refuge, is from the Latin, which is refugere. And refugere literally means to fly back. And there's the reorientation. It's the refugere. Re means again. And refugere, return, remember, refresh. All of these are reorienting us. They're turning us here rather than out. This is one of the primary ways that we get reoriented in our practice. And I think it's important to say that it's not a bad thing to allow your imagination to wish, dream, vision for something wonderful, right? To have a sense of possibility. I'm not saying that. As I was reflecting on this topic and talk this evening, I was remembering that for a stretch of maybe 6 months or so, when Eugene was had been in an accident and was in the hospital for a stretch of time and then very slowly recovering from a brain injury. I had this vision that I carried of um, swimming, snorkeling, actually, swimming with the fishes in Hawaii in the warm water. And it was such a beautiful, I would imagine this and then let the image like kind of run through my nervous system. And that, it turns out, in the world of what we now understand as working with trauma, is actually a really skillful thing to do. That for any of us, when we're especially in a very difficult or trying set of circumstances, that we can use our active imagination to fool ourselves in a way that the mind, body, heart doesn't know the difference between imagination and real. And so if we can conjure an image of something wonderful and then allow it to run through our nervous system, it can actually help ground and settle us in a positive way. And that was very true for me during that stretch of time. And I never went. I carried this image for days, weeks, months. And yet, uh, I would have been in trouble if I had held on to it and insisted, now we must go to Hawaii. probably if I had gone, I would have found out, like, the curtains and the new couch and the rug and everything else that I'm doing in my actual home, that it didn't actually make me happy. But for a while, it served a purpose, right? And all of us can call on that. You know, if you can't go, I live near Golden Gate Park, and there are new houses not very far from our old house, but it's much closer now to this beautiful old redwood grove in Golden Gate Park. And so almost every day now I get to walk in the big trees, and it's a refuge, that place. Uh, Not the idea of it, but the actual walking in and feeling the incredible stillness that those trees hold. Mm. So it's good to have places like that in your mind and in your life where you can actually go for refuge. Interestingly, on the big island of Hawaii, there's actually a literal place called the City of Refuge. And it's a little spit of land. Um, I guess you would call it a peninsula. And it has a little hut you can snorkel over and sort of take a look at it. And it's said in the olden days that a person who had behaved badly, you know, done some kind of transgression, maybe committed a crime or harmed someone in some way, if they could get themselves literally, physically, to the city of refuge, which would have meant probably hiking for hours or days across hot lava, they would be forgiven. Mm. And this feels very central to what this coming home is. It's coming home to a heart, a place in ourselves where we can say to ourselves, to the world, I'm sorry for whatever it is, and allow ourselves to be forgiven. Mm. This is refuge. It's not punishment. It is that return that allows us over and over to acknowledge and begin again. Mm. And of course, this is true in our meditation practice as well, right? How many times do we sit and the mind goes wherever it goes, gets caught in a memory or a plan or a worry or a rehash or a gripe and it's okay. You notice, you begin again. You get to come home. This is refuge, this way. Fly back, fly back, fly back, like that. Mm. So, some of you know that uh, in the teaching itself, there is an answer to the question refuge in what, right? So, if there's this reorientation from saying, no, it's not out there, and that new pair of shoes isn't really going to make you happy, then what do we take refuge in? So we can take refuge in the heart that is present and open and kind and forgiving. But in the traditional teaching, the language that's used is, many of you know, the triple treasure or the three jewels, which are the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And I'm sorry for those of you who have heard this story before, but I can't help myself from telling it every time I get to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. When I was a young Zen student and was sitting retreat, there was a meal chant that we did in which we said, we venerate the three treasures and give thanks for this food, etc., etc. And one day, I didn't know what any of this meant. one of the teachers was giving a talk, and he was talking about the three treasures, which is what I'm talking about this evening. And he was explaining that the three treasures are Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And the woman who was sitting in the seat next to mine, when he said this during the talk, she leaned over and whispered to me and she said, "Oh, I thought the triple treasure was breakfast, lunch, and dinner." So this is the reorientation, right? That's what we think. Oh, if I could only have a little more chocolate, then I will be okay. But these three treasures are what the teaching is pointing us toward. What can we trust? What can we actually lean back into in our lives? And fortunately for us, these terms, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, aren't, they aren't mathematical equations. You could, go Google them on and look up on Wikipedia, and they're very layered understanding of what these terms mean. And if you look across different traditions and different teachings, you'll see different flavors of answer. But if we understand that fundamentally this teaching is a teaching of reorientation, then we can begin to understand what is it that these three jewels are pointing us toward. How is it that they're reorienting us? So when we take refuge in Buddha, we are at some level taking refuge in the historical figure of Siddhartha Gautama. But really, this means we're taking refuge in a person, a human being like us, who, in the subsequent thousands of years of history has been made into this, prescient, godlike figure. But Venerable Ananda was very clear about that was not how the Buddha was depicted in the early days. He was basically just a guy who, woke up. And the invitation in Refuge in Buddha is that we can find that seed, that possibility, that potential of awakening that lives in each of us. This is what's sometimes called our Buddha nature. Some traditions it's referred to as our basic goodness. And this, my friends, as you all know, this is a pretty radical reorientation for those of us. And I don't know if this is true for everybody on this call, but for those of us who've grown up in a Judeo-Christian tradition, and even if that wasn't your family tradition, if you live in the United States, you are going to be impacted by a Judeo-Christian tradition, which is not at all about basic goodness, right? It's about the fall. It's about evil. It's about being flawed. And Buddhism is totally different orientation. Buddhism says, no, no, no. You're not bad. You're good. You're just confused. So, they remember them saying at the Zen Center, like, come on in and sit down. Check it out. See for yourself. It's a path that's inviting us to undo our fundamental confusion, which is this looking out, which is this assuming ourselves to be separate, solid, etc., which is assuming that time marches on, which is believing our thoughts rather than having the opportunity to drop into our direct experiences. Any of these ways of reorienting are doorways that open and invite us in to discover our Buddha nature, our true nature, our basic goodness, this seed of awakening. So we take refuge in that. Now that's, again, it's pretty radical, isn't it? How many of you, when you think, yes, take refuge in the fundamental goodness and the possibility of awakening in me, have at least some little voice that's like, oh, no, no, not me. Not me. Mhm. No, you. Yes, you. This teaching is for us. And it is a wide open invitation. Mm. So we take refuge in Buddha. We go for refuge. We invite ourselves to take up this possibility that I too, that you too, that we too are fundamentally good and have this possibility of waking up. Mm. And then we take refuge in Dharma or Dhamma. And most often, Dharma is understood in its kind of strict way as the Buddha's teachings. And as Venerable Analayo suggested, we actually don't know what the Buddha said. Oh, I find this just such to be so freeing. Mm. I can't tell you how many times I've run into someone who's insisted, like, but it doesn't say that in the Pali Canon. So to hear from, like, the super duper expert scholar that no, actually, if it doesn't say it in the Pali Canon, it doesn't mean it's not important. Analayo was really interesting. He said it's really important not to think that the original teachings, the Pali Canon, the Theravadan teachings, are in some way better than the later teachings. What he said is that you get to see this process of evolution as you study the teaching. You see how it evolved and unfolded. And that is an invitation to all of us that we too, you may have some insight, but there's more. You too get to evolve and unfold in your practice, in your life. So it's not so simple what the Dharma is, right? As the Buddha's teaching. And we can get into all kinds of sectarian arguments about, what the real teaching is, what the true teaching is, and what it isn't. But one of the broader ways of understanding Dhamma or Dharma is the truth. And I can't think of a more radical reorientation in this world, in this moment, right now, than saying, I take refuge in the truth. Because everywhere around us, we have spin, 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 spin. Seems like the truth is the least important thing. The most important thing is, whatever is going to sell more products or get more votes or piss off the other side or whatever it is. It's like so much churn. And there's a way in which this taking refuge in the truth, whew, right? Just try it. The next time you're in like the middle of a huge dilemma, I do this myself all the time because I have a mind that can be very creative in trying to figure out how to strategize, like what to say to that person, right? I had a conversation on Friday with some people who wanted me to take up a project. And I got kind of excited about it. And afterwards, I realized it's just not the right thing to do right now. And oh my God, my mind was like full of all of the elaborate explanations that I could give them for why not and blah, blah, blah. And the truth is, I don't want to do it. So, can you take refuge in the truth? Now, that doesn't mean that I have to say, I don't want to do it. But basically, I don't need to do all of that elaboration. I can say, I don't want to do it in a kind way. but it's the truth. And once you line yourself up with the truth, things get a little more simple. Mm. Although we're talking about a truth, and this is important, that is not like an academic truth. It's not the truth that's in the Pali Canon. It's not the truth that's in the Bible. It's not the truth that you can rigidly hold to. We're talking about a living truth. And again, this goes back to our practice. That's what we're practicing. We're practicing being with this unwieldy, dynamic aliveness. And most of us can barely stand it, right? The mind jumps in and goes, oh, it's this, right? Oh, this is good, or this is bad, or that was better, and this is worse. And the mind is constantly trying to box and package everything. And our practice, a fundamental practice of mindfulness and meditation, is can you sit down in the middle of that living truth? And that includes the mind trying to box and package. Like, okay, mind, just go right ahead, do your thing. That gets to be part of it, right? It's such a gift that we give ourselves, if we can, to be in the fullness of it. This is taking refuge in Dharma. And finally, Sangha, which again, originally was the fourfold Sangha, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the monks and nuns and laymen and laywomen. That was how it was presented. And that was radical at the time because the Buddha was in this very rigid caste system. That was the world he was in. We have our own caste system here, but he invited everybody in. Initially, he was a little reluctant about women, but he got over himself. Invited women in too, right? So Sangha is this broad community of people who want to go for refuge, who are willing to be reoriented in this way. This is taking refuge as Sangha is taking refuge in knowing that I always say, no one can do your practice for you, but you don't walk alone. Here we are, together, engaging in this way. So in the spirit of Sangha, I thought we could do a little bit of Sangha practice together, going back to this original community practice that was built into the early Sangha, which was a practice of coming together and doing a bit of ritual and ceremony and taking refuge together. So in a few moments, not yet, Johnny, but I'm going to ask Johnny to post the words on the screen and we can all chant together. But let me just pause and see for a few minutes before we do that, if there are any questions or comments, reflections, insights, anything anyone would like to ask or say. Please, Paul. Where'd you go?
So first, thank you so much. When you were talking about Bhikkhu Analayo and the fact that he says, we don't really know, we don't really know. And it suddenly occurred to me, well, then really this thing that we're doing is that you, Pam, and me, and all of us are co-creating this experience, as has been happening for the last 2,600 years.
Exactly.
We've all been participating in this amazing experiment, in this amazing unfolding. And it just, wow, what an insight.
Yeah, it's not like there's some teaching that is some sacred teaching that's over there somewhere. To your point, this is what you're talking about, Paula, is the reorientation. The teaching is right here. It's all of us gathered together, bearing witness to each other. This is Bernie Glassman, who is a Zen teacher who did practice. He did these street retreats. He would take people on retreat on the streets of New York. And he described refuge in Dharma as bearing witness. And it's a beautiful description. He described a refuge in Buddha as not knowing. So that was his creative embodied expression of this ancient teaching. And this is for each of us to do individually and collective. We bring it alive here in our engagement. That's how we keep the teaching alive. It's not written down in a book and put on a shelf somewhere. Yeah, thank you for naming that. Anyone else? Well, let's chant together then. I think what I'd like to do is I'll do a little guided sitting, and at a certain point, I'll invite you to open your eyes, and then we will have the words pop up on the screen. And just to say that, well, I'll say a little about the words. So the words are in Pali: Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangam Saranam Gacchami. And literally in the English translation would be, I go for refuge in the Buddha, I go for refuge in the Sangha, I go for Dharma, I go for refuge in the Sangha. And then you do it 3 times. So the second time is the same, but each phrase has a dutiyam pi, which means a second time I go for refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And then the third is tatiyampi, which means a third time I go for refuge. And it's kind of a magical phrasing, the 3, because 3 basically means many. So you are going for refuge perpetually, is really what we're saying. We're not just doing it half-heartedly. We're saying it 3 times, which means fully, wholeheartedly, ongoingly. In the Japanese, it's namu kie butsu. Namu kie means literally, I throw myself into the house of Buddha. It has this kind of heartfelt devotional quality to it. I go for refuge in. So let's, thank you, Terry, for letting me know. So just close your eyes for a moment. There's a lot of words. And take a moment of just being here. Right where you are. Breathing in and out of the heart. Knowing that ultimately it is this shared human heart that is the place of our deep love, and forgiveness. And Johnny, if you will put the phrases up on the screen. You'll hear my voice. I probably won't hear yours, but you could imagine all of our collective voices chanting this refuge together and feeling that sense of bearing witness, of being with each other as we line ourselves up with this wish to reorient our lives, to find a place of refuge that is true and real and sustainable. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Sangham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. So as we bring our evening together to a close, feeling into and trusting the aliveness, the truth of the Dharma, of the teaching that's here now. And by the power and truth of our practice here together, the ways that we have joined with words and in silence, we offer up any goodness, any benefit, any merit that may have come from our joining together. We breathe it in and we send it out, opening our hands, opening our hearts freely, generously, giving all the goodness of this radical reorientation, the possibility of awakening, of the living truth, of the truth of our deep connectedness. May all of that be for the benefit of all beings in all directions. By the power and truth of our practice, may we, together with all beings, be free from suffering, and may we all awaken and be free. Thank you all so much for joining in this non-full moon Sangha gathering. Please take good care of yourselves and just pay attention as you move through your days and weeks for where is refuge for you? What is it that brings a sense of something that you can lean into and rely on? Take good care. We'll see you next time.